Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I'm thrilled today because I think we're going to have this remarkable opportunity to consider and explore Bill Brendel's role as an organization development leader, a pioneer in mindful leadership, and the multiple decades of experience that he has. What's so interesting about Dr. William Brendel is that he brings a strategic perspective to performance, to engagement, and he's got just tons of consulting experience, but also grounded in an empirical approach, and I think that probably means a quantifiable approach. I think, I'm not sure what counts as empiricism for some people, but that he's introduced paradigms in conscious OD, groundbreaking tools like the MOST assessment. Bill has a passion for purposeful work. It's earned him lots of accolades and has pushed the boundaries of organization development practice, some say, and really crafting a legacy that encourages leaders to embrace mindfulness and presence in the workplace. So I think this is going to be a real opportunity. I'm just so delighted to have Bill. And I want you to, Bill, one thing that I neglected to do in advance of hitting the record button today, so everyone in our audience knows, is, and this is a good way for Bill to introduce himself anyway, to say a few words about himself, is how do you pronounce your surname? Is it Brendel, Brendel?
Yes.
And I should have asked before, and I'm sorry that I didn't.
You
But
nailed
Bill,
it the
welcome.
first time.
And, pronounce your name
It's
for me, please.
it's Brendel. You had it right
Brendel.
the first time.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
yeah. Well, tell us a few words about yourself. I mean, you've got this incredible career as a scholar, practitioner, influencer in what I call a little slice of life, which is organization development. And yeah, just tell us about yourself, Bill, please.
Oh, I'd love to. So, boy, where do I start? I didn't have a real career path. I know a lot of people have that same experience. They sort of stumble into things. So, I was always interested in psychology, and studied social organizational psychology at Columbia, and just really super interested in that, influenced by Warner Burke. At night, during the day, I was a strategic planning manager at
Hmm.
Panasonic, and then I thought, wait a second, the social organizational psychology stuff is great, but how do you actually develop healthy organizations? What do you do, right? And when I was at Columbia, there was no OD program per se, but there was a program, and still is, a very good program there in adult learning and leadership. And I often say if you took adult learning and leadership and paired it up with social organizational psychology, and they had a baby, that baby would be OD. It would be organization development. And that's precisely what OD is. So I've been very fortunate to learn, the social organizational side, which is the applied behavioral science, the social context, but also how adults learn differently than children. And it's such a fundamental mistake that people make in addressing and using, um, childhood learning as the mode of facilitating change in organizations. It happens all the time. Um, so, I got my doctorate in adult learning and leadership at Columbia, and then I taught at a number of different universities, Temple University, Texas A&M, the University of St. Thomas, and now I'm an adjunct professor at Penn State University, all the while doing OD. And like a lot of other people, not knowing it was called OD, or not even knowing that OD was a thing for a long time. But when I came upon it, it was almost like stumbling upon a gem in a dark forest and looking at it like, where has this been all my life? This way of looking at things. So there's that. That's the everyday answer. But the ontological answer I would give is that at some point during my journey, I had to confront death. I had to confront the death of my grandparents and helping them through hospice, I had to confront the death of my sister. And, by function, I had to confront my own mortality, and became very interested in the existential philosophers and began to wonder, if you bent existentialism backward upon it on OD, how would that change the way we look at OD? And it turns out it changes it a lot. It changes the way we look at authentic leadership. It changes the way that we look at what change is changing, what form transforms. And that's sort of where I settled. And borrowing from Eastern and Western existentialists, um, developing frameworks and measures that are validated. We could talk more about that in a little bit, but that's the existential introduction. So I wanted to give you both halves of that, both the everyday and the ontological.
Yeah, it certainly is an array of, or constellation of some experiences and some interests that, I mean, certainly lead you to this path. And so, as a consultant, though, I mean, what does this mean in everyday terms? I mean, what would be some of the issues or challenges or opportunities, however it is that you see the world? I'm sort of a, old school engineer in terms of diagnosing a problem,
Yeah.
looking for
Oh,
approaches to
yeah.
fix it. But how about for you?
That's totally classic OD. And I speak that language too. A lot of times, I have to come into an organization speaking that language first and also speaking that language last. But all the stuff in between is very dialogic
Uh-huh.
and generative, and where the real stuff happens. So a really good example of this, and I'll just kind of pick on a couple of existentialists like Martin Heidegger. Let's use him for a second because he's one of my favorites. Actually, let's start with Sartre. He never really called himself an existentialist, but he had a lot of great concepts, and one that applies to leadership. And of course, if you're doing OD, you have a sponsor, you have a client that you're working with, and they can make or break an engagement. All right. And Sartre has a concept called bad faith, making decisions in bad faith. And making decisions in bad faith is what happens when you're trying to please everyone, right? And your goal and your idea of leadership is to please everyone. And that's an illness. That's not, it's an existential illness trying to please everyone. It's playing a character, it's playing a role, right? And what genuine change and transformative leadership are stepping outside of the everydayness, outside of that role, even if it means upsetting a few people, right? Like people that you report to or people that you supervise. And so that change existentially is really important. When you make a decision in bad faith, any type of leadership decision that impacts the consulting engagement, if you make one that, follows a script, follows what you think people would like to hear, I don't see that change as very sustainable. But it's a fine line, because if you do take that path and you truly are an authentic leader and rise above the crowd, as Heidegger would say, you also stand danger, right? Because you are standing outside of the status quo. And organisms seek to preserve themselves. Organizations do the same thing. And if you're standing outside of a paradigm, it becomes dangerous. So the goal of a leader and even an OD consultant is to invite people to stand in brand new possibilities outside of their existing paradigms. So this is a quick sort of overview. There's more, because depending on the existential lens you're using, and there are 4 different ones according to the Headspace assessment, which won that award that you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Depending
This
on
is
which,
Bill's award, because I think I may have talked with him in the pre-show. So
oh yes,
we'll have this in the show notes too, though, too. But Bill won the 2024 Academy of Management Conference Article of the Year Award for Ways of Being, Assessing Presence and Purpose at Work.
so this, just to be very clear, that article was like a lot of other articles that received awards at the Academy of Management. So it wasn't
Sure.
like
Yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, sure.
award. I would love that, but
That's
just the fact.
self-deprecating, though, isn't it?
Well, it is what you okay. It is self-deprecating, and they would say, Dogen would say, who's an ancient, Zen philosopher. He would say that the best study of the self is to forget the self.
Yeah, sure.
And that's what existentialists do. And I remember when I got an email from you and you were talking about how important authenticity was. I thought this is
Hmm.
perfect because there's different types of meaning. And depending on the different lens of meaning you're aligned with at work, it changes your mode of curiosity. There are 4 different modes of curiosity according to this theory. And as an OD consultant, and leaders know this, and HR professionals know this, that great change comes from great questions, right? And then if you take a step further backward into the curiosity that drives those questions, those curiosities are very different. So
Mhm.
for instance,
Yes.
you you could have, like, let's say, an everyday curiosity, right? An everyday curiosity is about the technical stuff. It's about what you're doing. It's about objectives. And a lot of times it's about appearance and prestige and winning, right? So the forms of questions that you ask from that place, which is very much focused on an everyday sense of work and not a very mindful sense of work. We're very mindful it's mindless, actually, or absent-minded. You're just sort of on autopilot. I call that habituating. And that is a very static form of curiosity. That does not transform in the way genuine OD consultants work. And there are three others, and I can explain those later. But if people listening want to see what that looks like, you go to the website Open Source OD, and then /headspace. Take the assessment; it's free. It will show you what headspace you've been in lately. Um, the 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 counter to that would be a space of high mindfulness and also using the lens of ontological meaning. So meaning ranges between everyday meaning and like deep existential meaning. This is like the place where I believe authenticity truly lives. I think a lot of positive psychology puts it on the everyday spectrum, but real authenticity is highly mindful and especially mindful of one's own mortality. So think about a leader or anybody who is a change agent that's trying to motivate people to change. Using everyday curiosity and language is the same old thing. We habituate to that sort of language. It's like, oh, here we go again. We got another consultant who's talking about performance and so on and so forth. But if your lens as a leader or a consultant is on the existential, just think about this. You encounter people that you work with, right? And you don't see them as coworkers. You see them as fellow human beings who have a finite amount of time on this planet, a very unpredictable existence ahead of them. And a person who's evolved from being a little baby, right, to where they are. And in a snap of a finger, they'll be gone. So when you take that lens and you counter the other person, they're no longer you. They are thou, very close. And that motivates people. That type of curiosity is what is transcendent in nature. And that's the exact type of curiosity we need nowadays, where we're all kind of hearing the same thing about leadership development, right? How do we get a little more serious about this? And that's where that, I believe, at least, that's where I argue that lives in that article that I wrote.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think about you. You've reminded me of two experiences. At one point, I was doing quite a bit of work, probably with someone you know, Nancy Adler at McGill, and we were
Mhm.
taking these groups of very, serious global executives up to some very remote part of, I can't remember in what canton in Switzerland, but a place where you really just got snowed in. And having these leaders of, big substantive functions, managing 10,000 or more people, um,
Mhm.
uh, draw images of themselves, whether it was in watercolors or pastels or whatever media that we had available. And
Mhm.
I think that comes, to some transformative experience. Being able to
Mhm.
step outside of a normal boundary or an expected boundary, and to see how um, these executives would draw their self-portraits as leaders, and of course create a lot of things. And yet, on the other hand, I'm reminded, I'm working with founders and people in the C-suite. They often come to me because they feel that they are, put this politely, behind the eight ball, if that's a good word. I don't know what that expression means anymore, but they're somewhere downtrodden. They feel that things aren't well for them. And that often isn't at that kind of first example, which I might, equate to the more developmental and transformative experience, as to the executive or founder or leader in the C-suite who feels some enormous pain as a result of whatever, their own politics, their own fear of loss, of losing a whatever. How do you think about those, just to, in comparing that or thinking about that in terms of all that you've just said, Bill?
So much going through my mind, especially, well, when you talk about the first experience that you remember, I
Uh-huh.
love that. I love that
Yeah.
because it causes people to make a decision. How am I going to paint myself? And there's the way to paint it so that you're painting it for other people to absolutely love, right? Painting
Mm-hmm.
to expectations. And that comes from a place of ego.
Right.
Then you take something like, imagine the great painters like Pablo Picasso, who said, I don't care what people think.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to paint La Demoiselle d'Avignon in the way that I want to paint it. And it was this grotesque painting that launched postmodern art, is what that was. And he did it from a real genuine place. So that the way that you choose to paint yourself is really fascinating. So Heidegger, for instance, would say that the self is not just a static figure, that it's actually a field of care. So if
Sure.
you're going to paint yourself, you're going to paint everything within the field of care that surrounds you, that you cannot exist without a field of care, that by virtue of being a human being. The other thing is you can't have a self without an absence of self, which is death. There's no life without death, and vice versa. So part of the self is the absence of self. And so how do you paint that, right? So the idea of change fatigue that a lot of leaders face when you're talking about founders and leaders, I believe that change fatigue comes from a place of ego attachment, or I should say ego anxiety. Who am I,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
right? How do I show up in this change all over again? How do I reinvent myself and so on and so forth? That's exhausting. That's exhausting. But the existentialists would say, like Nietzsche would say, you just need to discover who you already are. And that means throwing your books down, throwing those leadership, you know, paint by number things down and painting a masterpiece. It's a very different way of thinking about leadership development. The other problem I would say that founders and other leaders face is an attachment to expertise. So just as much as they're distracted by ego anxiety, there's the attachment to expertise, which is a habitual way that they've come to see the world. And that's great for technical challenges. But if you look at the work of Ron Heifetz, the world is really made up of adaptive challenges now, and you need to think outside of your own expertise versus being addicted to it. So we have, I think, a big fault of leadership development. And there's a lot of great people out there. I love them because they got me interested in the first place. But a lot of them have actually painted themselves into a corner by focusing on ego and expertise and developing those. If you look at a lot of literature and a lot of simulations and leadership training, that's kind of where that goes. But the modern leader needs to know how to let go. And that's
Well, I think
why,
to your point, I mean, and I guess this would have been true. I mean, Warner Burke would have said this is that, I mean, despite 40 years of social science research, I mean, there's still an endemic of bad managers. I mean, because managers are promoted on the basis of their technical abilities. And, for a person like me who primarily consults in research and development, working with very smart people, scientists, engineers, technologists, all at the top of their game doing interesting things in cybersecurity or, solving unmet medical needs challenges. You see this, I mean, and yet the folks that I deal with tend to have whatever interpersonal skills that have enabled them to rise above all these other really smart people in terms of demonstrating some leadership. So I wonder, and I wonder how you think about that, Bill, Brendel, in terms of the technical leader versus the organizational leader, or how he or she or they might experience his challenges differently.
Warner Burke, I remember you brought him up, and I remember in one of his courses, I took a course with him called Leadership. And one of the things he said I'll never forget is that the best leaders leave their organizations behind in great shape. They have had proteges that they brought up. They developed leaders in a way that is authentic and meaningful so that when they leave, unlike charismatic leaders who leave and everything sort of collapses because the whole organization revolved around them, right? And also perpetrates this idea of the charisma being what it is to lead. But and that's why when I consult, I always ask people, leaders who I work with, who's your protege or proteges? Do you have them? What are you leaving? What are you working on right now to leave this organization and grow out of this organization? These are important questions and they're questions that force people to make an existential choice. Am I going to be a technical leader that focuses on everyday stuff? Or am I going to be a transformative and existential leader and make decisions from a deep place of ethical grounding? This is extremely important nowadays, Mike, because you think about the role of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can make profound decisions on technical matters. In fact, it could do it better than human beings can because there's no politics involved. It could work 24 hours a day. It can analyze scenarios. It can do predictive statistics and all that good stuff. The real forefront of OD is not coming from a place of technical expertise really whatsoever. It's a matter of innovation, genuine innovation, and inclusion, right? And the best way to do that is to forget the self. So an example to bring painting back into the picture here. I had met maybe a decade ago Rob Cancalosi, who is at the time he was the head of it was GE's training and development outfit. And I asked him, what are you working on? And he brought up ego threat. We're trying to get leaders to let go of their ego. And we're talking about GE is one of the best, training and development outfits. And he said, I asked him, how do you do that? What type of experiences do you do there? So unlike painting yourself as a leader, you know what they do at GE? I think they still do this. They have their executives paint on water instead of paper. And the aha there is the impermanence of the self, the temporality of the self, right? That's profound. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think everyone has a choice to make. You could choose to be an everyday leader and focus on winning, focus on those trophies, etc. Or you could be a transformative leader and humble yourself, let go of your expertise, even if just temporarily. And if I had to choose, it would be the latter. But that gets you in trouble sometimes. You look at some of the most authentic leaders in the world, and they are targets. People try to take them out because they threaten the status quo inherently. So anyway, that's a little philosophical, but that's what they do at GE, and I find that fascinating.
Right. I think about, I mean, that, makes me think about executive development and the organizations where I've guided that or led that. But it also makes me think about, my current book, also same name as the podcast, the People Dividend Leadership Strategies for Unlocking Potential. And it really centers on the themes of dignity, kindness, and respect, and what those, attention and care to those issues does for the expression of leadership, the development of leadership, and the growth of organizations. So it's really focusing back on those aspects of, I don't know how you want to think about that, civil life around dignity, kindness, and respect.
Yeah.
So, so how do you think AI is, you've done a lot of work on this, I mean, is changing or revolutionizing the field of leadership development?
Oh boy, this is one of those things that just splits me in half because I use AI every single day. I have become an autodidact and sort of teaching myself all things AI and how you can apply it to OD. So at the same time, right, as it being good in terms of helping you work through technical challenges, technical change, which is, you can get a change management person to do that. That's not really OD. To really do OD, there has to be an authentic piece there. There has to be, you know, moving into a space of something that might resemble meaning making or sense making, right? So human beings, I'm gonna just come out and say it, like our brains are completely flawed. We do not remember things the way that they happen. We have negativity bias, hindsight bias, confirmation bias. We are biased up and down, right? So one of the things that I use AI for, and I have my clients use it for, is to challenge their own perspectives. So for instance, if I were to write in the presenting challenge facing organization A and say, this is how I interpret the challenge. This is what I'm sensing. This is where I want to head. And then I can say, I can upload an article by Warner Burke. I can upload 10 articles by Warner Burke and say, critique my approach from the lens of Warner Burke, and it will critique it. I can also have it critique from larger paradigms, like critique my approach from the lens of postmodernism or feminism or functionalism, or you choose the paradigm, right? And so the assumption with AI is not that humans are better than AI. Humans are better at qualia, experiencing things as they are. AI can't do that. It'll never be able to do that. And genuine innovation, right? Which comes from a place of qualia and paying attention to the present moment. AI can do what actually most management people still call innovation, which is copying what other people are doing. That's innovative. That's really how they look at it. But AI is also fantastic. So I'll give you an example. I really got into creating AI or GPTs, what they call them. I don't know how familiar you are with those, but you basically program a chat GPT by training it, by having it use a specific lens, right? So one of the things that I created is called the use of self GPT. And this is something that I created. Yeah, it was inspired by Dave Jamieson, but also a
Yeah.
whole host of people like, Glenda Oyang and the work at NTL and all these things. So the way this works is you go into this GPT and it introduces you to the concept of use of self, right? And it can take you into a deeper understanding of what use of self is, but it actually directs you through an experiential learning cycle where it has you identify maybe one value that you hold, genuinely hold, but find yourself triggered in real situations. And sometimes you act in a way that is totally the opposite of your value system. Or you mess things up. You can't quite, for instance, if you believe in speaking truth to power, which is said to be one of the top 9 OD values, right? According to a recent study in Jabs. If you believe that, when in the moment and pressed up against the wall, as Sartre would say, can you actually stand up and speak truth to power? And the truth is that all of us as human beings have values that we have very hard times embodying. So what this GPT does is it identifies it. It then works you through identifying your triggers. Then it takes a deeper dive and helps you anticipate what assumptions and life experiences have formed these triggers. And it walks you all the way up to the point where you create a baby step that you can take, you can experiment with, you can try out. And then you go out and you try it and you come back to this GPT and you click on a button that says, I took my baby step. And that GPT does a second cycle of experiential learning. And that's the use of self cycle toward mastery. Is it good on its own? Heck no. I think it's better when you use that GPT with an accountability partner. And that's a concept Dave Jamieson is a big fan of. Finding somebody who you feel very comfortable with, who's non-judgmental, who can hear you, see you, feel you as a human being, right? And develop a sense of solidarity with. That's a key component in transformative learning, is feeling a sense of solidarity with others. You think about like Alcoholics Anonymous. What do? You own it, but you're with a group of people that you can relate to. It makes the transformation easier. And ChatGPT can't do that. So it's neat that AI can give you these great perspectives, can walk you through experiential learning, but it's so much better when you have a real life, genuine, imperfect human being along for the ride. So that's sort of how I see GPTs, and I'm probably a little bit too addicted to them because they've become a little bit of a second brain for me. I'll be honest about that. But that's
Does that worry you?
my thinking. Good question. Well, okay, so here's my theory. My theory is that if you're doing it right, GPTs open more space to be genuinely human.
Uh-huh.
Right? So if I have a GPT, let's say, analyze, here's something I do all the time with clients. If we use StrengthsFinder, I'll also ask my clients for the context of a recent project that they're working on, right? And then I'll get the 5 top strengths of the people on its team and have the GPT create as perfect a scenario as you possibly can where people are fit to roles in that specific project depending on their strengths. And of course, people won't just say, let's do it, but it gets them thinking, wow, if we reorganize. Now, the time I would spend doing that, I have ChatGPT do it. I go for a walk. I'm thinking about what's my next innovative endeavor? What am I going to, right? And to do that, I try to forget about everything. I try to just walk. That's where innovation comes from. It comes when you stop thinking. And that's like the most human thing of all. So I guess if I were to try to do everything through AI, it would worry me. But I think it's a great liberator if you use it that way to do things that are uniquely human. So I don't know. But I haven't figured it
Interesting. I
all
spoke
out
at
yet.
an HR conference, maybe a SHRM conference. Yes, it was a SHRM conference a couple months ago. And we were engaged in some discussion about AI at work and applications in the DEIB space. And this one person said, their company had all kinds of firewalls against generative AI in the workplace, but being encouraged by his manager to go, on his personal computer, cut and paste, and bring it back into the organization. So it's interesting to see how, at least in the client organizations that I interact with, some just fully embraced and said, go for, where others, create very restrictive environments. And it's interesting to see what that means in terms of innovation.
Yeah, this is history repeating itself. Only I would kind of bring up the work of Alfred Toffler, who,
Future shock.
yeah, and I think we're right in this in on the precipice. I don't even think we're there yet, but I think we're right on the precipice of future shock. And I have some friends who do physics and like all kinds of interesting work on the part of the brain that I that doesn't really work for me. And they're talking about quantum computing coming about and this and that. And this problem is age old. So I'll give you a really good example. When I found this out, I was kind of shocked. So my family comes from New York, from Hell's Kitchen and the Bronx specifically, mom and dad's side. And if you look way back, one of the pieces of land that the Museum of, what is the museum? It's not the Museum of Modern Art. It's the Museum of Natural History, the Upper West Side, that it's built on a piece of land that was once owned by like my great-great-grandfather, August Brendel. And I asked, why don't we have that land anymore? What happened? And I got this whole thing about how he made his money was developing horse-drawn wagons for the post office and selling it to the postal service. And when the Model T was introduced, his brother, Ralph, said, "Hey, I think we better get with the technology here and start using these Model Ts and maybe make a transition here." And, August said that would never happen. He was august in his own belief that this will never happen. In fact, it's cheating, right? And you can come up with all the reasons why it's terrible. And he lost everything. And so I think we all stand to lose an important piece of property right now. All of us. The property might be ourselves. It might be our futures. Yeah. Even like, remember when Google was introduced? Do you remember that? When it just appeared on the scene and the card catalog was still a thing in
Oh,
libraries.
sure.
You
Yes.
remember that time?
Yes, I do remember that.
That's like saying, you know, you can't use Google at work.
I
I want
see.
you to
Yeah.
go down to the New York Public Library, use the Dewey Decimal System, because Google, you can't rely on Google. What
True.
happens? It becomes more reliable over time, right? So, yeah,
That's
there are
great, Bill.
dangers. Yeah.
So as we enter into, just as a way of wrapping up and finishing out this episode of the People Dividend, it's been so great to have you as a guest. But going into 2025, what are you excited about in organization development?
Well, if you really want to get me started, I think the way that we're headed is to semi-autonomous organizations where human beings who are imperfect and biased and so on and so forth, and there's no cure for that, by the way. It's just how we're built. We're born to make mistakes, but I really think that we are going to be greatly replaced with machine learning and AI. So the question is, when you think about the people dividend, what is the new value proposition of human beings? And my theory on this is it is not anything that AI and machine learning can do. It's only things that they can't do. And I believe that the new value proposition 2025 moving forward is being human, being present, being inclusive, and being genuinely innovative, right? Maybe in the ways that you're using machine learning and AI, but more, I would say more in terms of creating leaps in market value, like the way that, if you read Blue Ocean Strategy, you
Mm-hmm.
think about how Cirque du Soleil took the concept of
Mm-hmm.
circus and completely created Blue Ocean. Not sure if AI could do that necessarily, but who knows? Maybe there's an algorithm for that. But I think that moving forward, the human value proposition is actually in a really good place. We are going to have to refamiliarize ourselves with ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And, hence my emphasis on dignity, kindness,
Yes.
respect.
Yes.
Um, because those are only the qualities that make all this stuff even more wonderful.
And they've got to be genuine, right? So like
Yeah,
dignity, kindness, and respect are all things I love, and you can train AI to do it, but
yeah,
it's not congruent if, let's say, you're walking down the street and you see a somebody who has no money,
sure.
right? A poor person on the corner, and you flip them a dime, right? You could say that's being kind, but is genuine kindness a little bit more? Maybe it's not doing it to be seen being kind, but maybe, kind of crouching down and saying, "You okay?" Making eye contact. AI can't do that, right? So I think kindness and integrity and those things are so important as long as we get familiar with what it means to be genuinely in touch with those
Hmm.
pieces and those frames. Yeah.
So wonderful. Well, Bill Brendel, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful for me, and that you've made this appearance on the People Dividend. Everyone can read more about Bill through the show notes. Find out about him on LinkedIn at his LinkedIn site or at Open Source OD, and look for the links in the show notes. So until the next episode, I just want to say thank you, Bill.
That's an honor. Thank you, Mike.
All right, great. Thanks. Until the next episode of the People Dividend, stay well.